Epilogue. Why is beyond your reach. It's an equation that can't be solved, an atom that can't be split. There will never be an answer that makes sense. And without this knowledge, without the exculpation of reason or faith or purpose that understanding can offer, things will not hold together. Gravity has failed, and you're forever falling. Even the murder house has been destroyed. The university gave the order, and it was swiftly leveled to the ground. Not a trace of it remains. A flat, dark tract has replaced it. And the trial? Postponed, and then postponed again. And so now, after all the tedious, exasperating delays, whenever it finally does take place, it will be a footnote to the larger, ineluctable events. The damage has already been done. Besides, what will the trial reveal? The dialectics of the courtroom would inevitably prevail, and opposing teams of experts will be summoned to go at one another. For every expert who solemnly testifies the cell phone tower evidence is irrefutable, another will be produced to refute it. For every scientist who makes sweeping, unwavering claims about the touch DNA on the button snap of the knife sheath, there will be another equally sincere, equally well-credentialed to insist that it is a conjurer's trick. For every deep analysis of the surveillance videos of a white Hyundai Elantra racing through the first light of dawn, there will be another that insists it's a murky, indecipherable wash. For every expert, there will be a counter-authority, and in the end, the jury will need to wade through what will certainly be a series of near-impenetrable disputes and somehow make a reasonable decision. I am assailed by all these thoughts as I return to the scene of the crime. I am standing on a ridge on Greek Row, and I can look down sharply toward King Road and see the vacant lot where the infamous house once stood. It grows dark early in the first days of spring in Idaho, and my recognition that the night has started falling triggers a memory of the last time I stood on this spot. It had been a cold night late in December. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of snow, and just moments earlier, I had been only yards or so away from the front door of the pale, flat-colored house at 1122 King Road. The street had been impossibly still. There were no extraneous sounds that night. I tried to imagine the house as it was in one of the body cam videos the Moscow cops had released, when it had been something vibrant and energetic. Suddenly, I had been trapped in a very bright cone of fierce white light. I was taken by surprise, stunned, in fact. And my first startled, terrified thought, this was what it must have been like to have been awakened without warning from a deep sleep, and to find yourself staring at someone raising a knife. There's someone here. Then I heard a voice. You gotta be careful there. It's icy. A black security vehicle had been parked kitty-corner to the front door of the house, the car concealed by the dark shadows. And the officer at the wheel, I now realized, had illuminated the auxiliary spotlight mounted on his door, pinning me in its harsh glare. Thanks, officer, I answered. I'll take care. And I headed off, walking absently in the darkness out of the gulch and moving uphill. In the raw cold, my dark stocking cap pulled low on my forehead, my hands shoved deep in the pockets of my parka, I found myself standing on a flat, grassy ridge on Nez Perce Drive. It was adjacent to the fraternity house where Ethan and Xana had partied on their last night together. And then the snow had started to fall in big, thick silver flakes. From my vantage point, I could look down at the house on King Road and watched as the snow began to cover it. The same falling snow that I imagined blanketing the old red brick university buildings, the roads that twisted through the humpbacked northern Idaho hills, and the final resting places of the 4 dead students. And at that moment, watching the snow thickly descend, I had a premonition. Soon everything will be concealed, and everything will be forgotten. It's nearly 18 months later, and I have returned to this ridge, and I realize how terribly wrong I was. For it's as if I can still feel the demons that were unleashed swirling about, wild and devious, encircling me. This is a drama not just about victims, but also about the victimized. They have lost their sanity, their wisdom, their love, and their faith. It is a story, I fear, where there are no survivors. Nothing has changed, and nothing ever will. Yet as I stand there still remains, I realize, one question, and it is the most perplexing. Why? Why would anyone, Koberger, a drug-crazed assassin, a psychopath on the prowl, take it upon himself to kill 4 young, exuberant, attractive students? Sure, the prosecutors will diligently try to stitch together a motive because that's what they know they need to do. They will look for logic, for reason. But those are benchmarks that are not applicable to this madness. So why? A killer, I believe, needs only 2 things: someone to love and someone to hate. Did the killer love the kids on King Road, fantasize about their beauty and ebullience, and hate himself for his inability to be what they were? Or did the killer hate the victims, hate the way their images marched through his mind, and love himself so excessively that he had no choice but to rid the world of their rebuking presence? We will likely never know, and it is folly to think otherwise. Nevertheless, I suspect I know what happened. Brian Koberger was, I believe, the murderer. And while I concede it might be possible to impugn specific items of evidence, when wedged together each fits neatly with the others to form a coherent and very persuasive whole. The DNA evidence from the cheek swab, the car videos, the knife purchase receipt the authorities have found, the cell phone tower pings, Koberger sorting his personal garbage into plastic bags and depositing it into a Pennsylvania neighbor's trash can. Any one of these items might be seen as specious or even a coincidence. But when assembled with one another, they coalesce into an overwhelming argument for guilt. I also believe his target was Maddie Mogan, and her alone. Why? When he entered the house through the second-floor sliding door off the kitchen, the killer immediately headed to the 3rd floor, to Maddie's bedroom. If he had been simply intent on killing everyone in the house, he would have started his savagery on the 2nd floor. He had no knowledge that Kaylee had returned for the weekend to show off her new car, or that he would find her in Maddie's bedroom. And he only encountered Ethan after he had descended to the 2nd floor. Yet once Xana overheard the encounter and spoke up, she too was doomed. Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, they all were grim collateral damage. The killer needed to escape, and they were in his way. But what about Dylan? How does one explain her passive behavior as well as the killer's decision to spare her life? I think the only reasonable explanation is one that defies commonplace reason. They both were in parallel states of shock, both locked so tight into their own private worlds, a young girl's terror, a killer's mania, that they could not see beyond the moments they were living through at the time. They both had fallen into a void where no one else could enter. If Dylan had spoken up, as Ethan and Xana had, if she had attempted to penetrate the killer's armory of hate, I believe she would have been another victim. And as I see that night unfolding in my mind's eye, I have little doubt that the killer acted alone. A scenario that involved multiple assailants would have left more DNA evidence. Other cars would have been captured on surveillance videos leaving the scene of the crime, and other cell phones would have been recorded pinging off the nearby towers. And also likely, by now another more straightforward and paradoxically more reasonable motive would have leaked and taken a convincing shape. But this was not a transactional or pragmatic crime. It happened, I imagine, like this. Koberger had crossed paths with Maddie, most likely at the Mad Greek restaurant on Main Street in Moscow, which offered the sort of vegan dishes he preferred and where she was a waitress. Did they talk? Did he ask her out? There is no evidence of any significant interaction, and I believe one wasn't necessary for her image to take hold of his thoughts. Obsessions came easily to him. He only believed deeply. I suspect that after their initial encounter, however fleeting and slight, he continued to follow her over many nights, and while the roommates hosted party after party at the house on King Road, he was often watching from the shadows. Yet I do not believe that he was casing the house on his 3 trips to the neighborhood in the hours after midnight on November 13th. Each one was, I contend, a killer's journey. Only he could not find the will necessary to step across the barrier that existed between the idea and the reality. After each trip, he wanted to run away, to return to his apartment. A violent battle must have been raging inside his head as he tried with an increasing desperation to fight off the demons that told him his role in life was to get revenge on all the people he could never be like. He was wavering, and he needed to become completely convinced that he deserved what they had, and therefore anything was justifiable, before he could act. And he needed to hear the voices telling him that he was smarter than everyone else. He could get away with murder. Is this what really happened? We may not know for certain. And as I stand on this grassy ridge struggling to make some sense of it all, my thoughts are interrupted by the loud, blaring sound of rock music. I look up and I see that the door of one of the fraternity houses has swung open as a couple, a young man and his date, enter. They're holding hands and smiling with a shared, giddy intimacy. For some reason, the door remains opened, and along with the music, the thick sounds of a party, joyful and promising, lift across the night. I hesitate, but then hurry off toward it before the door closes shut.